Now, I didn't get to see the Raid 2 in the cinema, which is why it's taken me quite a while to review it. I actually waited for the Blu-ray and picked up, when it was released Monday just gone, the Entertainment Store exclusive Steelbook edition. If we lose the J card, as you can see there, it's a steelbook with artwork by Jock, who is a comic book artist, and it just means that it matches up nicely with the copy of the Raid 1 that they brought out a couple of years ago. This was very kindly given to me by the Lucha Media Geek here on YouTube. So I picked up the Steelbook Blu-ray of the Raid 2, knowing full well that I would more than likely enjoy the film. So I've just watched it, and I have to say that I feel absolutely exhausted after watching this movie. It was probably one of the most intense action cinema experiences I've had in recent memory. I should probably explain sort of how I feel about the first film. When I saw the first film, you know, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a little bit lacking in story. Some of the action scenes went on a little bit too long, but by and large it was a fresh sort of injection of adrenaline into the action genre. And when I heard about the Raid 2 coming out, which was going to expand on the setting of the first one was set just in a tower block. The second is very much a crime saga epic, and it very much does expand, and that's one of the things that really interested me about the sequel, was that it was going to be something very different to the first movie, because, to be honest, that's what I feel sequels should do. They should do something different. You know, we don't want to retread the same ground. So basically the sequel kicks off where the first one finished, possibly within minutes, and you have the character of Rama, who is there on the cover, played by Iko Uwais. I don't know if I've pronounced that right, but he was in the first one. And it basically, the first few minutes of this movie do spend time tying up the loose ends of the first film. You know, they go into the sort of repercussions of the raid in the first movie and whatnot, and how the criminal underworld and mafia have responded to that, and it just sort of sets the scene but also ties up some loose ends. So from that perspective, I think if you haven't seen the first one, you might be a little bit lost in the first few minutes, but to be honest, once that stuff's out of the way, and it does only last sort of 5 to 10 minutes, the second film hits the ground running, and at that point it's a completely sort of fresh movie. The character of Rama, who is the only survivor, or one of the only survivors, a policeman from the first film, is sent undercover to get close to a mafia boss's son who is in prison. While in prison, you know, he basically becomes close to him, and then upon release from prison, he is sort of introduced into the crime family and remains undercover while they're sort of having uneasy relationships with a rival Japanese crime family who are trying to rule over the city where it's set. And to be honest, what I will say is this: the sequel is a lot more ambitious. I mean, it's 150 minutes long, and the first film was only 100 minutes. It's very much wider in scope. There's a lot more characters, a lot more subplots, but nothing about the plot in this movie is original, and that's not necessarily a criticism as such, but for anybody who's sort of familiar with their, you know, sort of kung fu movies and sort of crime dramas, there'll be nothing in this plot that you haven't seen before. That being said, it is well told and well acted, and that's one thing that I think is a testament to the film, really, because you know, you do find with kung fu movies, when they're casting people who can actually do the fighting in real life, they're not necessarily the best actors, but I actually thought that everybody in this movie was very strong in terms of acting, so that was something that helps it rise above a lot of these types of kung fu movies. So yeah, there is that. There's nothing original about the plot, but it is well told, so I do appreciate the fact that it tries to be more ambitious. I mean, it's written and directed again by Gareth Evans, who is a guy from Wales, believe it or not, who moved over to Indonesia and started making movies. He is basically, he's tearing action cinema a new one with these raid movies, and I'm interested to see what he does next. But it's definitely, in terms of style, it's very much in line with the first movie. I like the fact that they don't ignore the first film and that they do tie up loose ends from that film, and it makes that film feel sort of more important. The sequel, like I said, it's 150 minutes long, but it doesn't feel it. It rattles along. I mean, there must be at least a dozen just mind-blowing action set pieces in this. That was another sort of concern I had going in, because I knew that there were going to be lots of action set pieces, but I was a little bit worried that they wouldn't be driven by character, but I must admit they are. I think every action scene is very aware of the motivation of the people involved, the characters involved, and how it's progressing the story, and that's something that I found really impressive. I mean, as I said, even though the story's sort of unoriginal, the action scenes, each one is informed by the plot or by the characters, and everybody involved has a sort of motivation for being there, and that's actually quite refreshing in sort of modern action cinema, because all too often you find that action scenes really have no reason behind them, you know, Transformers looking in your direction. So yeah, I thought that was an aspect of it that worked really well. The action itself is just is mind blowing. You know, what these people can do in hand-to-hand combat is quite frankly incredible. And not only that though, but they sort of change up the action a lot and involve cars in this film. There's a car chase. There's a couple of action scenes featuring cars. One of which is a car chase. One of which is basically the character of Rama beating up a bunch of guys with a car. So it goes to show the versatility of the choreographers and Gareth Evans, the director, and the actors. You know, there are scenes in this film, in terms of action, that you'll watch and you'll think, I've never seen that before. And it's not often you get to see a movie that does that. You know, it's not often you get to see a movie that shows you something you haven't seen before, because, you know, Hollywood is sort of saturated with action movies at the moment. But to have one that comes along and just doesn't really play by the conventional rules in terms of in setup and execution is very refreshing. I must admit, during this film, I mean, I watched it alone and I shouted out loud, like, oh my god, at certain points. You know, it is very, very violent. I mean, I was actually surprised at just how much they showed in this. And I suppose I have to separate myself from the fact that, you know, this isn't a Hollywood movie. You know, this is a fairly modestly budgeted foreign film. So we can probably get away with a lot more, but Jesus Christ, like, some of the violence in this film, I was a bit like, holy shit, you know, I've not seen that before. There are more quirks to this movie as well. A lot of the characters are less conventional than they were in the first movie, believe it or not. I won't ruin them all for you, but needless to say, there is one called Hammer Girl, who is basically exactly what she sounds like. A girl who just uses hammers to fight and just wreck people and ruin their day. She's incredible, and she looks like she's basically just walked out of a Tarantino wet dream. So this film, you know, it is a lot more ambitious, it's a lot bigger in scope, it feels a lot more sort of mature in a way, but a lot quirkier than the first film. It's very interesting, sort of stylistically and tonally, all the way through. The villain as well, the son of the mob boss, who is basically the main villain, the son that is, I actually quite liked him as a character. I mean, don't get me wrong, you know, he's hateable and he's evil and stuff, and he is the big bad. But the way the guy, the actor whose name escapes me, but who plays him, he had some levity and some humanity to him. It's very much a film. I was actually thinking this while I was watching it, and a film it reminds me of, in terms of theme, is The Place Beyond the Pines, because it is very much a film about, underneath, you know, the sort of conventional plot structure of an undercover cop and all that stuff, and the mafia going to war with a rival gang, blah blah blah. Underneath all that, there's an underlying theme of fathers and sons, and fathers' legacies, you know, being handed down to sons, or fathers having to do what's necessary to protect their son all the way through. I mean, it's not subtle by any stretch, but it's there, and I appreciate that. I appreciate there's a little bit more to the plot thematically than just the conventional stuff, and it did remind me a lot of the Place Beyond the Pines. I mean, two very different films. They couldn't be really more different, but the themes I thought were quite comparable. You know, the film overall, is fantastic. I feel like, I don't know sort of how to recommend it enough. For fans of action cinema, you're absolutely going to love it. You know, the action in this is absolutely incredible, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the review, I feel exhausted having watched it. You know, it is that good. All the actors I thought were really, really good. It's just, the script is nothing you haven't seen before, and that's one of the reasons that, you know, I'm interested to see whether or not they do a third Raid movie, and where that would go, and what they would do with it. But in terms of spending 2.5 hours watching an action movie, you will do no better this year than watching the Raid 2. It is a great film from beginning to end, and for, you know, fans of action cinema, you'll absolutely love it. There are you know, a couple of caveats. A couple of the action scenes maybe go on, you know, a few kicks and punches a little bit too long, but you know, other than that, it's fantastic. And Gareth Evans is definitely a director worth watching. You know, I wonder how long it will be before a major studio like Marvel come knocking, you know, for Gareth Evans, the same way that Warner Brothers came knocking for Gareth Edwards. I don't just say that because they're both called Gareth, but, you know, both sort of smaller filmmakers. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him, and, you know, doing some big studio pictures, and he's exactly the sort of director I can imagine Marvel going for. And to be honest, if they do, get Gareth Evans doing the Iron Fist TV series, directing some episodes of that I would watch. So yeah, the Raid 2, can't recommend it enough. It's punched and kicked its way onto my top 10 of the year. It's a fantastic action movie, and I am going to have to go and have a lie down now after watching it. So that's the Raid 2.